Listen, you don't really want revenge the way you thought you did. Not in the way it shows up in your head when you're replaying what they said, what they did, how they made you feel small, and then acted like you were the problem for reacting. In those moments, revenge feels like a conversation you finally win. It feels like finding that perfect sentence that leaves them completely speechless, or that movie moment where they finally see you clearly, realize what they lost, and regret everything. But if you sit with it long enough and get completely honest with yourself, what you actually want is not a win over them. You just want relief from them living rent free in your mind like they still matter. You're watching Healing Looks Like Her, where wounds become wisdom and healing becomes strength. Let's get into today's message. The truth nobody really tells you is that the final stage of healing from a nice, nasty person doesn't look like a big confrontation, and it doesn't even look like getting closure. It looks like forgetting. I don't mean that in a forced, fake way where you're pretending you don't care while secretly boiling inside. I mean it in the quiet way your brain just stops pulling them into every single emotional reaction like they're still relevant to your daily life. That's the real revenge, if you want to call it that, of course. Not because you're actively trying to get back at them or hurt them, but because you have completely outgrown the need to keep them emotionally alive in your world. And I know that sounds almost too simple for how incredibly complicated and heavy it feels inside your body right now. When someone has been passive aggressive, socially manipulative, or just completely toxic to you, your nervous system doesn't just label them as the past and move on. It keeps them in an active file. It replays their subtle tone shifts on a loop. It replays those public moments where you felt embarrassed, exposed, or deeply misunderstood, trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved honestly in the first place. Nice, nasty behavior is confusing on purpose. They give you just enough warmth to keep you engaged and just enough cruelty to keep you off balance. So when you think about revenge, your mind naturally goes to correcting the story. You want to prove you weren't what they implied you were, and you want to be seen clearly by the people who only saw the warped version of you that they narrated. But the deeper you get into this healing journey, the more you realize something uncomfortable but liberating. Most of these people are not thinking about you at all anymore, and the ones who are doing it through the exact same distorted lens they used before. There's no perfect, magical moment where they suddenly become emotionally mature or accurate about you. That day you are waiting for is simply not coming. And that's exactly where the shift begins. Even if it feels a bit unfair at first, there comes a point where you just stop trying to win a game that only ever existed in their head. Instead of wasting your precious energy trying to correct their perception of you, you start building a life that doesn't require their validation or participation in order to feel real. Nice, nasty people rely entirely on your continued engagement. They don't even need direct engagement, they just need your emotional engagement. They rely on you checking in mentally, and they rely on you still assigning them authority over how you interpret your own memories. Even when they're not physically present, they stay active for the meaning you keep giving them, and that is the exact part that keeps the wound bleeding long after the interaction is over. I want to be careful here, because this isn't about pretending it didn't hurt or it didn't matter. It did matter. And if it didn't, you wouldn't still feel that sting in your chest. But what starts to change slowly is your willingness to keep building your identity around something that is already finished. There is a massive difference between acknowledging a painful experience and continuing to orbit it like it's the center of your universe. At some point, you have to stop needing them to understand you correctly. Not because you've excused what they did, but because you've realized their understanding was never going to be the thing that stabilizes you anyway. That is a hard realization to swallow. especially if you're someone who naturally tries to make things make sense and fix things. But some people do not participate in clarity, they participate in distortion. Waiting for clarity from someone who is deeply committed to distortion will keep you stuck in a loop where you are always just one explanation away from a peace that never actually arrives. This is where the phrase, "the best revenge is a life well lived," stops being a quote on a vision board and starts becoming a real decision for your nervous system. A well-lived life isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't pause to make sure the right people are watching. It just starts to expand into the spaces that used to feel completely occupied by them. And something beautifully subtle happens when that shift begins. You stop rehearsing conversations in the shower that will never happen. You stop mentally rewriting moments from years ago, trying to win them retroactively. You stop scanning your present life for echoes of their opinion or wondering what they would say about your success. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's definitely not a straight line. But you'll notice that the emotional urgency starts to drop. Not because the memory completely disappeared, but because it stopped feeling like an actual current event. Indifference is not the same thing as numbness, and you are not trying to become cold or unaffected. You are just no longer available for people who require you to shrink in order to make sense of them. If you've ever dealt with someone who was nice nasty, you already know how draining it is to constantly have to translate human behavior. To ask yourself after every single interaction, was that actually kind or was that a slick thing? That kind of mental labor is absolutely exhausting, and over time it makes you over attentive to people who don't deserve a single ounce of your analysis. Part of moving forward is giving yourself permission to stop decoding people who never spoke clearly in the first place. You have to accept gently, without turning it into bitterness, that some people will never see themselves the way you need them to. Not because you didn't explain your hurt well enough, but because seeing the truth would require them to take accountability in a way that would shatter their fragile identity. Once you understand that, you stop making your peace dependent on their self-awareness. This is where your life starts to get so much quieter internally. You start to notice that things that would have once pulled you into a 3-day spiral now barely even register. You see their name, you run into them, or you get a reminder of them, and instead of a surge of adrenaline and anxiety, there's just space. And in that space, you finally get your energy back. The real revenge is not that they suffer or that something bad happens to them. It's that they completely lose access to the version of you that was constantly trying to be understood by them. You stop auditioning for clarity in a room that was never designed to give it to you. You don't become indifferent by force, you become indifferent by the repetition of choosing yourself in small ways every single day. Every time you catch yourself entering a thought spiral and you consciously pull yourself out, that's a choice. Every time you redirect your attention back to your actual physical life, that's a choice. Every time you decide not to reopen a story that is already closed, that's a choice. It builds slowly into a kind of emotional distance that feels peaceful instead of defensive. What replaces the obsession isn't emptiness, it's presence. It's your actual life, the conversations you're having now, the things you're building now, and the people around you who don't require a translator. Please don't rush yourself into indifference. If you still feel anger today, that is not a failure. If you still feel hurt, that's not regression. But what you can't start noticing is whether you're actively feeding those emotions or just witnessing them pass through. Healing is not the absence of feeling, it's the absence of being ruled by it. Eventually, you reach a point where you can remember them without reopening the wound. You can think of what happened without turning it into a current emotional experience. That's when you know the hold has loosened. Not because they changed, but because you did. The beautiful irony of this entire journey is that the life you build while you're trying not to think about them becomes the exact same thing that makes you stop thinking about them. Not because you're trying to prove a point, but because your attention finally has somewhere better to live. Somewhere that actually responds to you, and somewhere that doesn't require you to question your own reality just to belong. You don't win by outspeaking them, you win by outgrowing the version of you that needed them to be different in order for you to be okay. And when that happens, there's no dramatic moment, no final showdown. Just a random day where you realize you didn't think about them at all. And that absence doesn't feel like loss. It feels like space you can finally use. You don't need a perfect ending with them. You just need a continued beginning with yourself. If this resonated with you, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs it. There's more to sit with in this series as you move through each stage of this process, but don't rush it. Let it meet you where you actually are, not where you think you should be. Remember, healing isn't about erasing the wounds, it's about discovering the wisdom they leave behind. Keep healing, keep growing, and keep becoming. From wounds to wisdom, one step at a time.